Now, in total, 38 cars derailed, and a fire ensued which damaged an additional 12 cars. On February 5th, responders mitigated the fire, but five cars, which are designated as 105, DOT 105 specification tank cars, were located near the number 23, which derailed. So we had the 5 vinyl chloride cars. 4 of them were at 26, 27, 28, and 29, and the 5th one was at 53. They were carrying well over 115,000 gallons of vinyl chloride. Now, that continued to concern authorities because the temperature inside one of the tank cars was increasing, which could result in a catastrophic explosion. The critical point is 180 degrees, and at the time, one of the cars was reading 140 degrees. As you know, the responders then scheduled a controlled venting of the 5 vinyl chloride tank cars to release and burn the vinyl chloride. The NTSB had no role in the decision-making or carrying out of the vent and burn. And I want to repeat that. We are not part of the decision-making or the carrying out of the vent and burn. The Federal Railroad Administration has guidance for how to conduct vent and burns. So as part of our investigation, we will evaluate whether the vent and burn was carried out according to that guidance and whether that guidance needs to be updated. With respect to the tank cars, transporting the hazmat, the train consist, that's the list of what's included in the train by car, included 20 hazmat tank cars transporting combustible liquids, mostly lubricants and cooking oil, flammable gas, and the vinyl chloride. 17 of those 20 tank cars were fully loaded. 3 were residue cars. All of those cars were placarded, though the placards were plastic and melted. Aluminum also melts. So we are looking at that situation, and we'll determine whether we recommend something else that could protect placards. Placards are there to tell emergency responders what is on a tank car and what the dangers are to themselves and to others. They are critical in response and in protecting the community. Yesterday, our investigators conducted a detailed damage assessment of the tank cars, including identifying and measuring breaching damages, noting where entire lading was lost, the condition of pressure relief devices, and other service equipment, underframes, and welded attachments. They also secured the top fittings on the vinyl chloride tank cars, including the pressure relief devices, and we're sending those to Texas to be tested. The wheel bearing from car number 23 has also been collected, and that will come to NTSB headquarters. We have a recorder laboratory, and we also have a materials laboratory that will come to our materials laboratory. So here's what we're focused on in this investigation: the wheel set and the bearing. Roller bearings typically last the life of a wheel set, but they do have a finite life, typically between 100,000 and 300,000 miles. There are a number of causes for overheated roller bearings. These could include fatigue cracking, water damage, mechanical damage, a loose bearing, or a wheel defect, and we will look at all that. We will look at rail car design and maintenance practices of Norfolk Southern, as well as Norfolk Southern's inspection procedures. We'll also look at any history of prior accidents involving car number 23 and this wheel set. We'll look at tank car design and derailment damage. The 105 vinyl chloride cars were insulated, which actually helped at the beginning. there are federal regulations which state that that car needs to be able to be cooled for 100 minutes. We all know the fire lasted well longer than the 100 minutes. What that means is after that time, the insulation actually kept the cars from cooling. So we're going to look at that. Also, 15 DOT 111 tank cars were transporting hazmat. Those were on the train. Now, why does that matter? Because current law requires certain DOT 111s transporting Class 3 flammable materials only to be retrofitted or replaced with DOT 117 tank cars. I'm sorry, replaced, not retrofitted. Replaced with DOT 117 tank cars. Of those 3, 2 did not breach. 1 lost the entire lading. Now, it's important to note that the damages to all 15 111 tank cars, including the ones that are not captured in current law, were typical of DOT 111 performance we've noted in numerous previous accident investigations. So we're going to look at the 111 tank cars as well. In the course of the investigation, we'll also look at Norfolk Southern's use of Wayside defect detectors. We're going to look at the spacing of those detectors, whether information is or should be monitored in real time with data trending from a control center. And we'll look at the temperature thresholds, which indicate immediate action once an overheated bearing is detected. Again, spacing and temperature are set by the railroads and vary considerably by railroads. We'll also look at how crews are alarmed and the instructions for responding to those alarms. Now, roller bearings fail, but it's absolutely critical for problems to be identified and addressed early so these aren't run until failure. I'm going to quote a report from the Transportation Safety Board of Canada in a 2013 report which looked at Wayside defect detectors and roller bearings. They said, "It is recognized in the railway industry that wheel-set roller bearings can fail catastrophically in as few as 10 to 15 miles on a train traveling at track speed. You cannot wait until they've failed. Problems need to be identified early, so something catastrophic like this does not occur again." This, of course, was much earlier than 10 to 15 miles, so we're going to look at that. Finally, we're going to look at the accident response, including how responders and the public received information prior to and right after the derailment. An informed public can be prepared to implement protective actions when accidents occur. While the general public may not require detailed information, such as the specific numbers, dates, and times of hazmat tank cars traveling on any route, they need to know, absolutely deserve to know, whether they live or work near a hazmat route. They also need to be aware of the hazards associated with releases, what railroads will do to prevent accidents and mitigate consequences, how to recognize and respond to an emergency, what protective action to take in the event of a hazmat release, and how to contact railroads and federal authorities regarding specific concerns, and that should also include state authorities. Now, we've issued a number of recommendations, rail safety recommendations. These are recommendations to improve rail safety following tragedies. Some of these recommendations go toward urging railroads to work with communities on the emergency planning, on routing, what should be routed and not routed through communities, and what information the general public and emergency responders need and deserve. So now I'm going to move into what is the NTSB's process. We are still in the fact-finding phase. You might say, what takes so long? We know what derailed the train. We have a lot of questions. In the initial stages of any investigation, we often receive information that's inaccurate. So we have to ask a lot of questions. And those questions create more questions so that we dig deep. We are very methodical in our investigative process. That takes time. Now, in this fact-finding phase, we have what we call parties to an investigation. These are groups of people who can help us gather the facts after a terrible tragedy. In this one, we have the U.S. DOT's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, the Federal Railroad Administration, Ohio State Highway Patrol, the Village of East Palestine, Norfolk Southern Railway, Trinity Industries Leasing Company, GATX Corporation, those two deal with rail cars, manufacturing of rail cars, and we have 4 unions, the Brotherhood of Railway Carmen, the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, and we just added the International Association of Firefighters. Now, these entities help us gather the facts around investigations. There's an advantage to that for them, too. They get the facts when we get the facts, and they can take immediate action to improve safety. They do not have to wait for the end of our investigation and should not wait. We expect them to act. Once the fact-finding is concluded, which takes a few months, then everyone will agree in the facts. That will go into factual reports, which will be included in our public docket. Then we will go into our analysis phase. None of those entities are part of the analysis phase. They cannot. The NTSB is an independent federal entity, and we need to remain independent. So we conduct the analysis of those facts, and we issue safety recommendations in a final report, as well as findings, the probable cause or causes, because there could be contributing causes. And for this one, it'll probably be 12 to 18 months from now. But here's what I'm going to say to the communities, because you might be saying, what takes so long? Again, it takes a long time. We are very deliberative. We are the gold standard when it comes to investigations globally. And we are methodical in our approach. But if we see a safety issue that we need addressed immediately, something systemic, we will not hesitate to issue an urgent safety recommendation. We did that just a few months ago, and FAA acted on that immediately, so that process works. And we will not hesitate to do it again, especially in this one. So with that, there is a lot more work to do. So I'm just going to pledge to the community and to others, we never go away. Our whole goal is to improve safety, to issue safety recommendations to prevent this so East Palestine and other communities never experience this again. We will work then, after those safety recommendations are issued, to get those recommendations implemented. There are recommendations we have consistently worked on for 50 years. Positive train control is a great example. We don't give up, and we won't give up on this one. So thank you. I'm going to take questions. Please raise your hand and state your name and your affiliation.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Sheldon Ingram, WTAE-TV, Pittsburgh's Action News 4. The fact that the crew didn't try to stop the train until it reached that critical stage, does that suggest a system-wide failure, that they weren't alerted or didn't react sooner than when it reached 253 degrees?
So the question is, why did the crew not react after the first two Wayside detectors, where it was identified 38 degrees above ambient temperature, which was 10 degrees at the time, and then 103 degrees. They did not react till 253. Those two initial temperatures are designated by Norfolk Southern as non-critical. The information they receive is they don't have to do anything, so they were following procedures. Once they got the critical alarm of 253, they took immediate action.
In your estimation, does that warning threshold have to change?
We're going to look at, so the question is, does that warning threshold have to change? The warning threshold is set by railroads, and again, it varies by railroad. We're going to look at that and see if that threshold should change. That's going to be one of our priorities in this investigation. Tom.
Tom Costello with NBC News. Is there any suggestion yet what actually caused the overheating? You said there's a list of possibilities, but is there any leading candidate what was causing this overheating with the bearings or potentially then the axle?
The question is what was causing the overheating of the bearing and therefore the axle? It's a great question, and it's something we have to look at as part of this investigation. Right now, we've collected information that we need on scene, the type of information that goes away when we release all the rail cars and when we release the scene. But that is exactly what we have to look at. I'll tell you one thing. We have one of our incredibly skilled investigators looking for other cameras along the route, just to see if we could see other things. You know, there was that one video that was aired. We want to see if there are other ones, because what we're getting from the defect detectors, we want to make sure, does that match up? So we're digging into that. Amanda.
Notified, and why are those standards not set by the government?
Was it too late by the time they were notified of 253 degrees Fahrenheit, and is that something that should be set by the government? I will tell you that had there been a detector earlier, it would not have, that derailment may not have occurred. But that's something we have to look at. And we'll have to look at lack of federal regulation, see if there's any guidance from the Association of American Railroads on that and what they follow. But that is definitely something we have to look at, because there is a great amount of variance between different railroads. Does that answer your question? Alan.
Hi, thank you very much. Alan Levin with Bloomberg News. I'm interested in these wheel bearing detectors, or hot box detectors, I guess. Have you done investigations in the past in which those were causal? And do you have any existing recommendations on them?
Do you want to answer that, Rob? I'm going to not stumble over here. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
We do not have any.
Go over here.
Sorry. We don't have any current recommendations on those. I would point out that the hot box detector would not be causal. The cause is the bearing overheating. There are other detectors as well in addition to hot box. They do use acoustic detectors to detect noisy bearings, which is another indication of a failure. So,
but no investigations in which the hot box was part of a chain.
At least not in the last decade.
Sir.
Blair Miller with Cox Media Group here in D.C. You talk about testing of the equipment, whether it's in Texas or here. How important, how key will that be in your investigation?
The question is how important the testing of the different components that we have identified for further evaluation, how key that is to our investigation. Incredibly key. We want to see what caused that wheel bearing to fail. And then we want to see how those top fittings performed on the vinyl chloride tank cars. So that will be key to those will be key to our investigation.
Ian Duncan with the Washington Post. I just
Hi, Ian.
another question on the thresholds. I saw some reporting this morning that 95-degree difference between the bearings on each side of the train is a common threshold. It looks like Norfolk Southern set that at 115. I think that there's potentially a greater than 95-degree difference at the second detector.
So it's a measurement of the different sides of the train, so the different wheel bearings, and it's the difference between the two, which Norfolk Southern sets at greater than 115. So the 103 would not have been critical for them.
But is Norfolk Southern out of the ordinary in having that at 115 instead of 95?
That's what we have to look at. Again, each railroad sets a different threshold, and we've seen different variances. I mentioned that Transport Canada report from 2013. CP and the Transport Canada notes the differences between how Canadian Pacific and Canadian National designate their thresholds and designate where wayside detectors are.
I'm so sorry. Could you maybe paint a picture for us? Is this a box, an infrared box on the side of the tracks that the train goes by? I guess I'm trying to visualize how exactly this works. And I'm picturing a box with an infrared scanner that is reading the undercarriage of the train. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it actually points up, but I will let our experts.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. That's essentially what it is. In this case, it was down on the ground, pointing up.
The train goes over the top of it.
Over the top of it.
Okay.
In some of these wayside detectors, not here, they're actually a shed that the train drives through, which protects everything from the elements. But there are a number of different types of detectors. Again, it's something that's not regulated.
And is it using an infrared beam, or help me make sure we're using the right language here? How?
That's my understanding, is that it's infrared based.
Yes. Then we'll go over here.
All right, Zach Ledrick, The Hills. Thanks for doing this. Can you speak to whether or not there's been any determination, whether you can say at this point whether there was any wrongdoing on Norfolk Southern's part?
The question is, was there any wrongdoing on Norfolk Southern's part? We'll have to evaluate that during our analysis. Once we have all the facts, we will look at the analysis. I think we will do our own analysis. The advantage to having the Federal Railroad Administration and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration as parties to our investigation is they have enforcement authority. They are getting the factual information when we are getting the factual information, so they can take action on enforcement. They'll know.
Tanya Snyder with Politico. It seems from your report and what you said here that the engineer braked and then the automatic emergency braking kicked in, and then they got out and visually saw that the train had derailed and that there was a fire. Was there no other way for them to be alerted that the train had derailed and that there was a fire, which seemed to have happened before they got out of the train?
So the question is on the sequence of events. Once the train crew was alerted to the high temperature, they get an alert in the locomotive cab. In this situation, they were already in braking mode because of a train in front of them. So they began to slow the train and stop the train, but then the derailment occurred, and that engaged the emergency brake application. The notification comes directly to the cab of the locomotive and tells them. We're going to look at the notifications and how that comes across, and Norfolk Southern's policies and, for notification to rail crews. I will tell you it's standard. Rail crews disconnected the locomotive from the cars that were burning and moved up about a mile to protect themselves. That is standard as part of railroad operations.
Yes, hi, Hogan with AP. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on your report, to some degree, was indicating many things work as they should under the current guidelines. So can you expand a bit about what gives you that certainty about this being 100% preventable?
The question is, what gives me the certainty that this was 100% preventable? We've never seen an accident that isn't preventable. And I actually think that I don't like the word accident. I hate to use it. Nothing is an accident. And so, when it comes to prevention, it could be actions on the railroad's part for maybe not having more conservative policies on thresholds, or it could be some sort of problem with the wheel bearing that could have been addressed earlier. Those are just examples. We don't know that yet. We are still conducting our fact-finding portion of the investigation, but we will know that at some point. That's when we issue the probable cause, and there's often not just one probable cause, which is this derailed. It's usually a number of contributing factors that a number of factors that contributed to that derailment.
A quick follow-up, if I may. I was just wondering if you could talk about the level of cooperation NTSB has been getting from the parties. I know that in certain instances, sometimes rare, that you issue subpoenas. Is that something that you might foresee at some stage in the process?
So the question is, what is the cooperation between the NTSB and the parties to our investigation, and whether we foresee having to issue subpoenas? At this time, I don't foresee having to issue subpoenas. We are having excellent cooperation with all the parties to our investigation. We're getting what we've asked for thus far. So far, so good. That can always change. But we do have an established relationship with all these entities, and we are hopeful that will continue throughout the course of this investigation.
Eric Gazelle, Wall Street Journal. So, do we have any indication as to why so many rail cars derailed? Like 38 on a train of 149 seems like a large quantity. Is there any evidence to suggest why so many derailed in this particular incident?
I mean, we'll look at the question is why so many cars derailed. 38 derailed in the accident scenario. This is something we've seen before. There are different forces in play when a train is braking and moving, and we often see bunching up of rail cars. This is, unfortunate, but yes, that's what we see.
Hi, Ashwarya Gavi, New York Times. What specifically are you investigating as preventable, both for the accident and for the impact to the community?
What are we investigating that's preventable? Pretty much everything about this accident. It's everything from the wheel bearing to the rail cars to the tank cars to the actions of federal entities or inaction of federal entities. We'll look at state entities. We'll look at locals. Especially with emergency response and information they did or did not have, likely did not have. And we'll look at Norfolk Southern, their policies. So there are often a lot of considerations in what goes into what is preventable. There is usually far more than one thing.
Madam Chair, can I ask two quick questions? One of them, I'm wondering, did the crew know that the temperature was increasing? When they went over the first two hot box detectors, is there any reading for them telling them it's getting hotter? Just be aware that it's getting hotter, even if it did not yet rise to the level of alert. That's the first question. The second one is, you, of course, are an investigative body and you offer recommendations. You are not a regulator. You can't force change on any participant. And yet this has been an industry that you have tried for many years to bring a little bit more regulatory safety controls, and then Congress has at times kind of undermined those initiatives that the DOT under previous administrations had tried to enact. I'm just wondering, your level of frustration, you said you're committed to going forward here, but your level of frustration that this has been, in many ways, something that for decades you, the FRA, Congress has looked at, and yet not a lot of progress. So again, those two questions, if you don't mind.
I'm going to let you answer the first one. If you can repeat the question, then I'll do the second one.
Did the crew have any knowledge that the temperature was rising as they went over the first two hot box detectors?
The detectors, the way that they're designed, will provide a radio announcement. And so the radio in the cab would indicate that there is an issue. There's a number of things in the radio announcement that occurs, anything from no defects to the total number of axles. It would have announced the temperatures at this particular axle and told them which axle it was from the front.
Just an automated computer voice kind of thing.
Yes.
On the radio saying,
Yes.
This is your speed, and or this is the temperature rather, and
Yes.
it did not yet rise to a critical level.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. And again, your
Yeah,
thoughts about the other issue.
And I was asked about my thoughts on the level of frustration on our rail safety recommendations. We don't have the authority to act on recommendations. We issue safety recommendations to the entities that might be involved. It could be Norfolk Southern, could be FRA, could be the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, could be rail car companies. We'll just have to see who that is. I want to just talk a little, let me back up a little bit on this because I do want to highlight numbers. I've seen this 1096 number out there on derailments. That includes Class 1s, the commuter railroads, the Amtrak, and the short line railroads. If you're just looking at the Class 1 freight railroads, and I looked at this myself just the other night, confirmed it with FRA. If you're just looking at derailments, it's in 2021 for Class 1 freight railroads. So it's the major railroads. We're talking Norfolk Southern, CSX, BNSF, UP, CN, CP. So what we have is 868 derailments in 2021, 68 collisions, 330 that are designated as other. A lot of those are obstructions on rail track. And so, you know, I raise that because of we can improve safety in the rail industry. And we have a number of our safety recommendations that are on our most wanted list of transportation safety improvements that we have been fighting for decades to get implemented, which would improve rail safety. But I want to be clear. We have to make sure that what we're proposing as the NTSB is specific to this accident. That's our job. Our job is to determine how this happened and to issue safety recommendations to prevent this one from happening again. That's why I got so frustrated and tweeted. Nobody tweets for me. I tweet my own tweets. That's why I got so frustrated and tweeted, because there's a lot of misinformation on what would have prevented this, and I'm happy to go through some of those. This is a community that has been devastated. They deserve to know what happened, how to prevent it from happening again. They deserve to have the right solutions. After, you know, often during our investigations, everyone is guessing. I saw it all over media, which was driving me nuts. And, you know, those solutions, all of the ones I heard of are not the solutions. And so we'll do a little evaluation to prove that they're not. But I get frustrated because what happens is everybody jumps to those solutions. And then when we issue our final report, we get ignored. That is frustrating. So when we issue our final recommendations, I want Norfolk Southern to act if they get one. I want FRA and PHMSA to act if they get some. I want others to. We need action on what would prevent that from happening again. That is our goal.
Yeah, James and Fox, I just want to get an understanding of the timeline in terms of the toxic chemical release. Was the NTSB notified immediately afterwards, or when exactly was NTSB notified that there was potentially this mild chloride release? And do we have an exact time of understanding of when that became apparent to the first responders also coming on scene? Because that's what has not been shown in the preliminary report.
The question is, when were we notified of the derailment? I am going to let Rob answer this question, but I'm going to start with, we do have a response operations center that works 24/7. Dedicated professionals that are monitoring social media. They have television screens. They get input from the National Response Center, which is where the railroads and others are supposed to report any type of tragedy. But for this one, I will let Rob address the specific question.
And specifically at the moment where the toxic chemicals released, when were you notified and the community as well?
So our notification would be the notification with the accident. There is, the Coast Guard operates a National Response Center, which you can think of as a 911 for the country. All the railroads have to report to these accidents to that Coast Guard Center, who then reports that to our own Response Operations Center. And that, through that, we get the notification. In this particular case, I think it was about an hour for the notification. So with regard to the toxic chemicals, we're notified of the derailment and the fact that there's a fire with it. I mean, that's the extent of the notification to us. The first responders, they're the ones that get to the scene and they look for those placards so that they can make sure the community is safe.
Can you say a little bit more about the polymerization of the vinyl chloride that was happening inside one of the rail cars and why that was happening in one rail car, not the others? What was going on with the integrity of the car itself to make that happen?
The question is about the polymerization that was going on in the vinyl chloride tank cars and why one tank car and not the other tank cars. So vinyl chloride, it's a monomer, and it's actually the monomer from which we make PVC, polyvinyl chloride. And so there was a chemical reaction. It was initiated by the vinyl chloride monomer getting too hot. And of course, in a fire environment like that, the amount of heat flux on each car is going to be a little different. So the car that was observed to have the rising temperature probably had the highest heat flux during a fire. That polymerization reaction is an exothermic reaction. So it's going to add heat to the car, which is why the car temperature was rising. It does reach a point where the temperature added by the reaction actually causes the reaction to speed up. So the rising temperature causes the reaction to speed up, which causes the temperature to rise more, and you reach what they refer to as a runaway reaction. And that's what that 180 degrees, you want to stay below that so you don't get into a situation of a runaway reaction. That was the big concern, that would go to a runaway reaction.
I want to call on somebody who has not been called on yet.
Hi, Brian McGill, Wall Street Journal. I want to talk about the plastic pellets that caught fire with hot axle. Did that happen before the derailment or after you guys know that?
No, the question is, when did the plastic pellets, when was the fire initiated with the plastic pellets? That was after the derailment.
And which axle it was on 23?
Front or which axle? Yeah, go ahead.
The car 23 was the car carrying the plastic pellets, the car with the hot axle. I actually don't know whether it was the front axle or the rear axle at this point.
Sir, the one in front. Yes.
Hi, Rashad Hudson, Nexstar Media. Can you speak a little bit more about the rare investigative field hearing you plan to hold? What do you plan to learn, and will you make sure that Norfolk Southern is there to hear concerns from community members?
Yeah, so the rare investigative field hearing I mentioned, our investigative field hearing, we do not conduct those on every investigation. It is very rare. I think the last one was a Southwest Airlines investigation that investigative hearing that we held a few years ago. The investigative hearings are different from a town hall. Investigative hearings are invited witnesses so we can get facts and we can talk about possible solutions surrounding what occurred, why it occurred, how it occurred, and what would prevent it from reoccurring. And so we will invite Norfolk Southern. Part of your question was, will we invite Norfolk Southern? I'm sure we will invite Norfolk Southern as part of that panel. What happens in those investigative hearings is each of the board members will ask questions of the panelists. Possibly a few staffers might also ask questions of the panelists, so we can really dig into the information to identify what occurred here. And go here and then to Alan.
Kyle Mazza from UNF News. Former President Trump visited East Palestine and decried the Biden administration, your federal government response. What's your reaction to him saying that and decrying the Biden administration, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg for not visiting too soon in his words? What do you say to the former president since he's not in government now and you're there?
Yeah, so this is what I'm going to say. Enough with the politics on this. Enough with the politics. I don't understand why this has gotten so political. This is a community that is suffering. This is not about politics. This is about addressing their needs, their concerns. That's what this should be about. So I don't care about the politics. What I care about is caring for them. What I care about is figuring out how this happened. And what I care about, and the NTSB cares about, is getting to what would prevent this from reoccurring. Safety is the only thing we care about. Politics is left at the door. Politics is not part of our investigative process. Our credibility rests on us carrying out an objective, thorough investigation, and that's what we'll do here. Thank you for the question. Sir. Well, I do have some data on the train length and weight. For this one, the train was 9,309 feet long and 17,977 tons in weight. The question is, am I concerned about that? I'm concerned about any train that transports a hazardous material or could negatively impact a community, just like I'm concerned about other modes of transportation. This is why the NTSB exists, so that we can get to zero in all modes of transportation to improve safety over time. I think we've been part of that, but we also have a long way to go, and we'll continue on in those efforts. So I'm always nervous, of course, and I care for we all care for the communities because we work with them afterwards. But, you know, we need to make sure that after these tragedies, because I go back to our recommendations and something Tom asked about. It is frustrating when our recommendations don't get implemented. And I tell you, it's particularly frustrating for our investigators when they go to another accident scene and say, I saw this on this one. Why wasn't it addressed? Sometimes our recommendations are not implemented. That is frustrating. If they were, those numbers I read you would be much lower.
2 more questions?
Go for it.
Thank you. On the braking specifically, the report mentioned that the brake application puts off some heat. Are you at all concerned that the brake application, whether it's over a distance or immediately then, may have increased the temperature and led to the overheating axle superheating?
I'm going to allow you to answer that.
The braking that occurred prior to the critical alarm was dynamic braking. That's using the motors in the locomotive as generators to slow the train. That would not have added heat to the axle. So the critical alarm occurred before then, before they actually used the train line brakes.
All right, since that was a follow-up, I'll do two. Alan.
Hi, thank you. I'm wondering if you can provide a little bit more information on where the last sensor was and where the derailment occurred. It seems that they're quite close, but I can't tell. Maybe I missed it from the report of the distance. Was it 100 feet, 1,000 feet, or roughly, obviously?
They certainly are very close. We are getting the numbers. Part of that has to come from our event recorder data, and we haven't yet done the full analysis of the event recorder. The event recorder will tell us exactly when the emergency brake application occurred, and we can use that with the location of the detector to understand how far the train had moved when the derailment occurred. So that's an analysis yet to be done.
One more. Anybody who didn't ask a question first? Okay, Ian, you're up.
So the video that we have, it looks like the bearing's basically on fire or really hot at that point, and I think that is very close to that second detector. Is the condition of it being so hot consistent with the reading that was coming from the detector at that point?
Yeah, so we're still looking at that video, and we're looking at others, and that's why we're trying to find other videos to determine, what was going on there. We believe that it was hot, and at that point, grease is burning. That's what we believe on the axle. But do you want to add to that? Yeah. Okay.
So we are researching that particular video as well as other videos. We've been contacting businesses that have security cameras all along the route. One of the things we have to do is get the actual location of the camera. So we had that video, we didn't have the actual location down to the foot. And so as we do this analysis and look at all of these video cameras, we're going to get the actual location so that we can estimate, when this occurred. With regard to the temperature measurements are obviously on the outside of the bearing housing. So the video is looking at the end of the bearing housing, vice the bottom. So there may be some difference there as well, and we will look at what effect that might have had on the actual temperature measurement in the accident.
All right. Well, we thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping. Eric Weiss with NTSB Media Relations. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Jen Gabris was the spokesperson for the accident. She was on scene in East Palestine. She's now back. After the preliminary report is out, our policy is to go to the railroad spokesperson. That's Keith Holloway. He's over in the doorway over there. He will be the person for any follow-ups on this accident. It's keith.holloway@ntsb.gov. Thanks so much. Yeah. Hey, just one more thing. The crew did not know that the temperatures were increasing. They got the one radio warning. Just want to clarify that.
Not like the specific temperature number, like you say. So they just got the warning, they reached the threshold, then we've gone.
Correct.
And
Correct.
They got the warning when it reached the third?
That's my understanding.
Third sensor?
Yes, once it reached a threshold, they got the radio alarm. Yes.
Where are we gonna do? Hey Bart.
Yes, we're gonna do after we're gonna do the
Jennifer, hey, I know, shut up, Jennifer. Are we okay to go live here before 5 to 6? Or do we need to close the doors?
Oh, I think we can do this down before that. Yeah.
Is there anywhere else we can go live with?
We told the building if you put it outside, that there would be a